I had been working on a new video, call it An Ode to New York. And then 2020 happened.
New York has nearly half of all the infections here in the U.S.
1,200 people are currently in ICU.
We're going to run out of these masks unless we get some type of emergency supply.
The story of that video was around how living in New York had changed my life, because it did in a lot of ways. I don't live in New York anymore. I moved to Costa Rica and I've been living here for the past few years, but my company, the startup I run, still has an office in the city. I was in that office just 1 week before the first case appeared in the city, and seeing how the situation evolved in this first few weeks, seeing how both of these governments responded, I wouldn't choose anywhere else in the world to be than Costa Rica. Let me show you some numbers. The first confirmed case in New York City was on March 1st. The first confirmed case in Costa Rica was March 6th, a woman who flew in from New York City and was not diagnosed because had no symptoms. 2 days later, after the first case was confirmed, the government was already issuing orders for companies to begin working from home. The border and all schools were closed before we had 100 cases in the country, and non-essential businesses soon after. In New York, schools were only closed after the 1,000th case was breached. Non-essential businesses were closed after they had 10,000 cases in the city. Now, it's obviously necessary to note how New York City is extremely more dense than Costa Rica, and this might not be a fair comparison on the speed of the spread. However, what I'm trying to point out here is how quickly were measures implemented by the governments.
We don't have masks, we don't have ventilators. I was very blunt with the people of my city yesterday that at the beginning of April we will run out of basic medical supplies.
Esto es un hecho único en la historia. Tenemos que ser persistentes y disciplinados.
On hospital beds, New York City has approximately 23,000 beds, which is 2.7 beds per 1,000 people. That more than doubles Costa Rica's 1.1 beds per 1,000 people. And perhaps that's why the Costa Rican government had to be extra careful. With limited hospital beds and only 140 ICU units in the country, any steep curve would put us in a lot of trouble. In New York City, as of April 10th, there were 21,000 hospitalized on COVID-19, plus the people already in the hospital. The system was overwhelmed, and then they had to improvise. This chart over here is probably the most important one of all. Few countries, even success stories like South Korea, have been as successful as Costa Rica in slowing the curve. So the key here was obviously how quickly the government responded and how seriously they took the situation from the get-go. But it has not been easy. We've been in lockdown for around 5 weeks now. We are still allowed to come outside. We're encouraged to exercise, for example, as long as we're alone. But one of the reasons for that is because we didn't have the legislation to do curfews. It's not in our constitution. So the government had to find workarounds to stop people from leaving their houses, at least in groups. One of those was restricting car movement, for example, forcing most businesses to close. Even at the supermarket, only one person per family can go in, and there's a restriction on how many products you can purchase. It's helped us not run out of toilet paper, for example. Resident aliens were told that if they left the country, their visas would be revoked. Schools have been closed for a month. So the measures have been very, very hard, but they're working. So we're a country of 5 million people, and with 140 ICU beds, 80% of them occupied before coronavirus started. We were in a tough situation, but the government really quickly reacted and repurposed a whole hospital to treat potential coronavirus patients. We just couldn't afford or be prepared to build a new hospital in 10 days like China did, but I think it was a pretty solid effort, and so far, only a couple of those beds are in use. Now, fellow Costa Ricans will find this pointless to mention, but all treatment and all tests for coronavirus are free. They're covered by our universal healthcare, which is a thing that Americans don't seem to be interested in. Now, it was a huge, huge effort from a government that, myself included, we all often criticize as inefficient. But if things keep moving the way they've been moving, we are going to go down in the history books as one of the most successful case studies for managing the coronavirus crisis. Now, the challenge with all of this, the biggest impact that we're going to suffer is in the aftermath, because we are a country that lives off tourism. We have 2.6 million visitors per year, which makes around 5% of our GDP. Around 400,000 jobs depend directly or indirectly from tourism. That's almost 10% of our total population and 18% of our workforce. Most of their income has been completely stalled. Now, that of course extends to other businesses and other industries. Restaurants and retail have been affected pretty badly as well. I'm a business owner. I kind of understand what these companies have to go through. While Slidebean, the company I run, has not been severely affected by this, I understand most businesses don't have the capacity to maintain their payroll ongoing without any revenue for more than a few months or maybe less. So a lot of business owners are in a tough spot, and I don't blame them if they need to let employees go. It's terrible, it's painful, but business owners find themselves in this situation where they need to do everything they can to salvage the business and hopefully bring those jobs back again later. Now, our country has been struggling with a budget deficit for the past few years. This government has had to implement new taxes to be able to counter that, and even with that situation, the government was able to come up with a $3+ billion package to be able to give these families at risk at least some income over the next few months. So there's, I think they're funding around 400,000 families with checks of up to $200, which is of course not a lot, but again, when a family depends completely on an industry that's completely shut down, being able to eat every month is an issue, and the government is doing everything they can to treat that. And Costa Rica is not a rich country. This fund, all the efforts that we'll need to make, all the money that we'll need to spend over the next few weeks are going to have a massive impact in the country in the months and years to come. We have no idea when this pandemic will end. We have no idea when the country will open up again. And the best thing we have is this chart I just showed you, which at least keeps our hopes high. I think that after a couple of weeks of being in lockdown, you sort of start accepting this as the new normal, and hopefully most people have begun to be productive again at their jobs if they still have them. Finding a silver lining in all this, there's an opportunity for other entrepreneurs. The world has just come up with 1,000 new problems, and I think that there are ideas out there that are going to tackle those problems specifically. So it's those entrepreneurs that will take advantage of the situation, not only for themselves, but for the new jobs that the world so desperately needs to create to get out of this recession. It's that creativity, it's the ability to work under this uncertainty or pressure, it's the ability to adapt faster that makes up most successful entrepreneurs. So I'm trusting in all of us, them, to get us out of this. After we get through this, if you're Costa Rican, please stick around the country and vacation here. If you're from outside of Costa Rica, please consider our country for vacations. I'll personally take you for some Caribbean chifrijo if you visit. This is my personal YouTube channel where I treat a lot of random topics outside of the stuff that I do in the official Slidebean channel. If you enjoyed my content, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.